Hi everyone, today we're going to be talking about uh, adolescent identity and what the academics behind adolescent identity are, and the scholarship, and what the experts say as far as understanding your identity and how it's formed. So identity development is one of the most important stages that adolescents experience in their lives. G. Stanley Hall was a psychologist who developed theories about adolescence at the turn of the 20th century. He described this period as a time of storm and stress. I am sure a lot of you can relate to this. This referred to the idea that adolescence is a time of extreme emotional disturbance and turmoil. 100 years later, psychologists such as Jeffrey Arnett have revised Hall's theory to show that while adolescence is a period of transition, it need not be a universal experience of emotional upheaval. So not everybody feels that your teenage years are tumultuous, but there's still a very large school of thought, scientific thought, that it is. During this presentation, we're going to talk about how we define identity, how we're going to identify the stages in adolescent identity development and distinguish between self-identity and social identity, and recognize the importance of identity development in youth. Okay, so what is identity? Identity involves many, many complex factors related to who we are. Identity development leads to a change in how we feel about ourselves. Despite the fact that identity development occurs throughout one's lifetime, adolescence is the first time that individuals begin to think about how our identity may affect our lives. During adolescence, now this isn't, hard and fast for everyone. There may be some of you who might think, well, no, that's not true. I was thinking about this from the time I was 10. Of course, this is not true of everybody, but it is true of most people. During adolescence, we are much more self-conscious about our changing identities than at any other time in our lives. Our identities are not simply our own creation. Identities grow in response to both internal and external factors. To some extent, a person actively chooses an identity, but identities are also formed by environmental forces outside our control, right? It could be societal, it could be within the home, it could be within your group of friends. Okay, so self-identity is how you see yourself. It's how we define ourselves. It forms the basis for self-esteem as the adolescent develops into an adult. Self-identity can be influenced by our environment and also by developmental stages from childhood to adulthood. Adolescents experience changes in how they see themselves in response to their social environment, their peers, as we just said, their peers, family, school. Our identities shape our perceptions of belonging in particular environments. Our social identity is how others see you. So how others see you might not be exactly how you see yourself. A transgender person might be seen to the outside world as being female, or as a woman, but the person might feel very much that they are a man. And so social identity is society kind of identifying you according to social norms, and that can be very different than how someone identifies themselves. Okay, so there are many dimensions to our identity, and they can't be separated from one another, but they do intersect to form our self-identity. Some aspects of our identities are visible, such as race, ethnicity, gender, while other aspects of our identities are not visible, such as political identity or social class identity. The visual dimensions of one's identity, such as race and gender, tend to be more important for individuals since they carry more serious consequences in society. These aspects of identity assume the status of master traits, which are defined as identities that are significant to the individual in every social context. For example, race may be important in all social interactions, but political identity may only be relevant for some individuals during election time. And this is a theory that was put forth by J. Frideris, and it was talking about immigrants, integration, and the intersection of identities. Okay, and so our multiple identities. Let's look at an example of social context, how social context may influence someone's self-identity. Jasneet's parents were born in India, but she is an American citizen and generally self-identifies as American. She chooses to celebrate the Indian festival of Diwali, with her parents and extended family, but celebrates American holidays with her peers from high school. Jasneet has an American national identity, but her home environment finds that her ethnic identity may be important. In her school environment, she may celebrate American holidays and traditions. This illustrates how ethnic and national identities, self-identities, may vary depending on the social context. Okay, so which identities do you juggle right now? Not as you grew up, but right now. Are you juggling a gender identity, a sexual identity, religious identity, racial identity, ethnic, national, generational? Okay, and so Erik Erikson believes that there's 8 stages from infancy into late adulthood, where we are going through a series of crises that need to be resolved, and that we actually cannot achieve some kind of self-identity until we go through a crisis with it. So, for instance, I'll give myself as an example. I'm a Catholic, and according to Erikson, until I would have some kind of struggle with my religious identity, where I'm not sure how I feel about the church, or I'm not sure how I feel about the religion, the religiosity, or going to church every week, until I struggle in some way and then come to terms with that part of my identity, I won't hold on to that identity strongly. Okay, so according to his theory, it's between the ages of 12 to 18 that youth experience the stage called identity versus identity diffusion, where you kind of like push things away, right? The ages of 12 to 18 represent an average, but depending on the social context, adolescence may begin earlier and end much later on. Success in this stage means that one is able to develop a secure sense of self-identity. Failure during this stage leads to role confusion and a weak sense of self. Erikson referred to identity development as the critical development task for adolescents. So according to Erikson, this time is really, really important for you to kind of figure out who you are, so that you can move forward as an adult with a sense of self. So what is this? So identity versus identity diffusion. Eric argued that adolescents face major identity crisis. This crisis can lead to the development of a secure identity, or it could place youth at risk of an insecure identity. The adolescent must struggle to establish his or her identity in at least one or more areas, such as personal, familial, occupational, etc. Erikson noted that society influences how adolescents view themselves, so identity development tends to differ by culture and historical context. So, who it is you interact with, how you interact with people, where you interact with people, what it is that you are interacting with people about during your adolescence, according to Erikson, will influence your identity later on. Okay, so according to Erikson, when does this 5th stage, identity versus identity diffusion, take place? I'll give you the answer. It's between the ages of 12 and 18. If you were listening, you know, right? Marcia's identity development status. Okay, so let's talk this through. James Marcia furthered work on Erikson's theory by using interviews and surveys of male college students. He differed from Erikson in that he proposed identity statuses rather than stages. Statuses don't necessarily occur in a linear fashion, sequentially, right? But can change in response to environmental crisis. Identity statuses may occur in many domains, such as school, relationships, and values. Okay, so according to Marcia, identity diffusion, low commitment to a particular identity. We might not think about a particular identity until we experience a crisis or are otherwise compelled to adopt an identity. Meaning, I don't really have to think about the fact that I am German, of German descent. I just have never been put in a position to have to give it much thought. Scenario, identity diffusion. She's graduating in the following semester. He has not thought about what he wants to do after graduation and has not explored college or jobs prospects. Okay, so in the domain of occupation, his identity is diffused. He has not explored any options or made commitments. In Marcia's status of identity diffusion is similar to Erikson's notion of identity diffusion as possible negative outcome of adolescent crisis. Both of these theorists regard this as the most negative stage or status, when you just don't care. Identity foreclosure, a commitment to an identity without a crisis. So here, another identity status identified by Marcia as identity foreclosure. Foreclosure involves committing to an identity prematurely without exploration or choice. This occurs when the parents hand down their traditions and commitments and the adolescent does not make a conscious choice. The negative consequences can be that the adolescent may later feel resentment about not being allowed to choose for themselves. This stage involves being highly committed to an identity without exploration. So maybe this could be, a national or a cultural identity, like they were saying that your parents just passed down to you, or it could be a religious identity, like we were talking about earlier, but one that you just kind of accept without any kind of internal struggle over it or thought over it. Okay, so this would be identity foreclosure. Jennifer, she's passionate about music. Her parents expect her to follow in their footsteps. She enters a pre-med college program, and she abandons her musical interests. According to Marcia, this is an example of occupational identity foreclosure. Jennifer does not explore the options for pursuing a career in music, but follows her parents' expectations without considering whether or not the field of medicine is actually suitable for her. She also does not explore the career of medicine thoroughly. This example demonstrates the low exploration and high commitment typical of the identity foreclosure stage. Okay? And a moratorium is like a break, right? So identity moratorium in the midst of a crisis, searching for an identity to adopt. It can create conflict between adolescents and their authority figures. So Marcia describes this as an active stage of exploration and a low commitment to a particular identity. This is an interesting and exciting and potentially dangerous stage for an adolescent, since they are able to try many new things as they seek to discover their identities. This stage occurs at any point during early to late adolescence and is one of the most typical identity statuses for adolescents, right? And can involve risk taking. And so you have to know that this is what can be typical, but knowing that also should make you more thoughtful around it. During this particular status, adolescents may come into conflict with their parents or other authority figures as they explore their identity. Maybe you push the envelope about what to wear, or how late to stay out, or who to hang out with, or what your political views are, or how you feel about your religion, or what you want to eat